before we reimagine the future of longevity, we're going to do a quick pop quiz on something you learned earlier. I'd like to ask you to count the number of times the letter F appears in this single sentence. Not a trick question. Just read the sentence, count the number of times the letter F appears in the sentence. Okay, I know you guys are fast readers. How many people saw all three? Most of you. Anybody see 4? Some of you. Anybody see 5? Okay, so the real answer is 6. And so now that you know the answer, see if you can count the 6 Fs. I'm going to help you out. 5 flies of, scientific of. Hiding in plain sight, as Robert said earlier. Now, young kids can see these things. The older we get, the harder it is for us to see these Fs. That's another depressing future of aging, except I'm here to tell you it's good news. You know why? Because that F could represent the future of longevity. In fact, that F represents functional longevity. That's what's coming. Now, what's current longevity? Current longevity is we're living longer and stronger lives, but we're not solving the underlying problem of aging, so we create an older population that needs to consume more healthcare. That's a vicious cycle. We need to do something radically different than that. This is whack-a-mole, the current system, right? So let's build it ground up from first principles. Living systems, the first principle is selection favors increasing homeostatic capacity. Now, what's homeostatic capacity? Well, here's some definitions. Resilience, robustness, you can read the rest of the list, but it's just easier if I show you. You remember homeostasis, which is a state of equilibrium. Homeostatic capacity is your ability to get to homeostasis, which is, think about it like a weeble wobble. That's my other favorite toy. You push it, and it self-centers. That's essentially what nature gave us, and it's so successful that we don't realize we have it until we start losing it right around my age. So here are the things I lost. I'm going to catalog for you. I turned 40, and all of a sudden, I couldn't ride a roller coaster or do a cartwheel, do a somersault. Because now I come out of it wobbly, my weeble doesn't self-center, and I say, I don't want to do it anymore. My kids have no idea what I'm talking about. My kids have no idea what I'm talking about. When I say at 8,000 feet, I don't feel well. They're running around. They're sprinting at 8,000 feet. I've lost something. My weeble doesn't self-center. When I go into a restaurant, my pupils don't open up enough. So now it's too dark. You know, outside, 55 degrees, my kids are in T-shirts, and I'm in 2 layers. I've lost my ability to self-center. When they get sick, they're sick for 2 days, they're totally fine. I get sick, I'm coughing for a month. You know, I used to be able to stay up all night in college and feel fine the next day. I went to see Coldplay last Wednesday. I was still tired on Saturday. There's no recovery. Recovering from an injury, a wound, it just takes forever. You know, I used to be able to eat anything. Now, when I eat a bad meal, I wake up at 1 a.m. So is it really bad diet alone? Is it also lost homeostatic capacity? I'm losing metabolic capacity. This is the reason I think all high-end athletes are retiring at 40, because all of a sudden the homeostatic capacity across the board starts declining. Those are the subjective experiences of lost homeostatic capacity. Now think about objective things you can't feel. When we're young and our blood pressure or sugar go high, our homeostatic capacity returns to homeostasis, except after 40, and some of us, they stay high, and we give it names like diabetes and hypertension. What if all of these things are just features of lost homeostatic capacity, just one thing? We should always look for the most parsimonious explanation for this phenomenon. Maybe lost homeostatic capacity is that explanation. I mean, we just can't see it because in evolutionary terms, we're stuck in an adaptive valley where it's an uphill battle to see a completely new way of treating the human body. So in order to create a new system, we created a prize with the industry leaders and scientific leaders called the Palo Prize. My wife and I put $1 million in to create this new system that we want to see. And we recently announced a $2 million donation to the National Academy of Medicine to foster new innovations in the way we think about aging. Now, in order to do this, we have to fundamentally change the way we think about things. Again, build it bottoms up. Our body's a dynamic system, and yet we've been using static models to study it. What do I mean by this? Physics got integrated by treating it as a dynamic system. Minkowski added the 4th dimension to physics, integrated space and time, and all of a sudden now physics made sense. We need to do the same thing in biology. Biology right now is a 3-dimensional science. Let's just add one more dimension, make it 4-dimensional, and it'll change everything. Let me explain. Right now, when you go to your annual checkup, a doctor will measure your heart rate, blood pressure, glucose, cholesterol. These are all state variables. That's like a seismic scientist trying to forecast the collapse risk of a building based on the angle of declination. That's not what they do. They do resilience testing, right? That maps much better collapse risk. So we know that our heart rate doesn't change our whole life. Our heart rate response to exercise will declines. So why are we using the thing that doesn't correlate with aging and risk instead of using the one that actually does correlate? Now imagine doing this to every diagnostic test, turning every diagnostic test into a resilience test. Dynamic diagnostic is a new diagnostic field we've got to create on top of the current field to bring it up to date to the 21st century, 100 years after physics. The goal here is to add temporal resolution to biology. We have great spatial resolution, getting smaller and smaller, but let's actually add the time domain, and that'll change everything. It'll also change the way we do drug discovery, because instead of thinking about longevity as the endpoint, we can think about homeostatic capacity as the endpoint. That's something we can measure right now. How resilient are you? Let's stay healthy a whole lot longer, and longevity is a free call option. Okay, so when you think about therapeutics now, we got to think very differently than we have been. Instead of trying to restore homeostasis, let's increase homeostatic capacity. Let's focus on capacity building instead of just trying to solve the problem. The way we treat hypertension right now is we give you a blood pressure lowering medicine. Your blood pressure is too high, you try to prop up the Weeble with the drug, and what happens if you prop something up? It causes system atrophy. Your body actually gets worse, and you need more and more drug. This is like the coffee model. It's a great pick-me-up, but the more you drink, the more tired your baseline. So you can't solve chronic problems with these acute therapies. That's what we've been doing for the last 100 years. What's the best way to treat high blood pressure? It's to exercise. And when you're exercising, you're raising your heart rate and raising your blood pressure, and your homeostatic capacity acts as a drug and restores normal blood pressure. Imagine putting blood pressure raising medicines into the body, low doses intermittently, as a way to lower blood pressure. We've never tried this, except we know it already works. In fact, we know it works in exercise. The more you make the body worse, the stronger it gets. It's like building a muscle. Or you can think about it like vaccination. Make the body worse, it gets stronger. Completely counterintuitive. Building capacity instead of solving the problem is the future of therapeutics. Now, there's something I'm even more excited about. There's an old idea in evolution called Weismann's hypothesis, which is the idea that maybe senescence was actually a trait. This idea was in biology for many decades until 1953, when Nobel laureate Peter Medawar said, you know, senescence is unlikely to be a trait because it occurs after you finish reproducing. That's known as Medawar's argument, and people stopped thinking about senescence as a trait that you could do something about. So now the assumption is aging is something that happens. Now, here's the counter-argument to Medawar's argument. We just lost this man to aging. Now, he was reproducing long after he started aging. So maybe Medawar's argument applies to females. It doesn't apply to males. And I would argue even in females, menopause happens during reproductive age. There should have been runaway selection to defer menopause. It didn't happen. So I don't think Medawar's argument holds. In fact, if you look across nature, there are species that have no visible evidence of senescence. Solving senescence doesn't violate the laws of physics, right? Because we are not a closed system. We can always acquire more energy to fight entropy. But I'm not here to debate whether or not senescence is a trait or not. I'm just going to take the road less traveled, because the idea that senescence might be a trait has not been looked at in decades, and yet this is exactly what might be possible. When you think about this possibility, I think it's actually quite likely we're going to be able to find these and be able to edit them out, because it's happening already. There was an old idea in biology that cells have programmed into them programmed death and aging. That was a heretical idea until now it's accepted. Well, what are cells that are programmed to age and die who edit out their own genes today? They're called cancers. It is happening all over the place. Now, cancer is a scourge of humanity, but why don't we focus on not only what they're doing wrong, what are they doing right? How are they able to edit out their senescence pathways? Sometimes your greatest enemy is your greatest friend, as Bob Marley said. Now, I think that there are interesting things that we already know that are destroying, that are genetic traits that are destroying our body after 40. Clocks, control systems, repair mechanisms, right, and power. These are things that are all in decline. Every cell underperforms a little bit after 40, and the cumulative effects of that are probably the futures of aging. So let's go find those genes, edit them out. It could be the end of senescence as we know it relatively soon, which is crazy. Now, it's only 1953 that we discovered the code of life. This is James Watson, who co-discovered the double helix. Ironically, the year we discovered the code of life is the year we stopped thinking about the code for aging and death. So it's time to put it all back together on the table, right? Use all the molecular biology and the tools we know to go hunt for the cure for aging. All this is not going to slow down evolution. It's actually going to increase evolutionary speed, right? Because in the olden days, we needed hardware to be able to select preferences for blue pill or red pill, because everything was hardwired. But now that we have a brain and we can use memes and ideas as a way to acquire traits, it's more important to live. So historically, Darwinian evolution relied on the death of individuals as a way to innovate. For hardware innovation, we need to die. For software innovation, we have to live. Right now, we're accumulating all these memes, and yet we're dying, so we're shoveling all this knowledge to the next generation through school and books. No, it's actually much better if we could just continue living and living healthier lives. So the end of senescence is actually the human destiny. It's the evolutionary destiny. Okay, so what are the things that you can do right now while we're waiting for scientists to figure all this stuff out? You guys ready for this? This is your prescription for functional longevity you can start doing today. Okay, how many people here have spent the day surfing or being out on the beach and they get tired at night? How many people have experienced that? Okay, so here's the biology you need to know. Sunlight suppresses melatonin, and you get the return of melatonin at night. Every species in nature's history lived in ambient light, day-night variation. We're the first species to cover ourselves during the day with indoor jobs, sunblock, sunglasses, clothes, and at night, instead of enjoying the darkness, we put on all the lights. We're losing the dynamic range. We're actually losing functional capacity. Let's actually do the other thing. Let's increase our dynamic range. You know, right now, if you stay away from the sun, you actually debuffer your capacity to be able to handle the sun. We always had the perfect amount of melanin in our skin, and now that we're staying away from it is why we get sunburns and other types of skin diseases. We're the first species to not live in ambient temperature. Every species out there lived in 40 degrees and 100 degrees. They had brown fat to heat them up. They had cooling mechanisms. We're the first species that's trying to stay 70 degrees all the time. We're trying to narrow our dynamic range. Right? We put on clothes. We have HVAC systems. We moved to California. Your blood's not thinning when you move to California, losing dynamic range. One of my clients said, you know, my wife can tell the difference between 69 and 71. That's a disaster. Right? You're supposed to be able to handle everything. So spend more time in cold weather, spend time in altitude, spend time in depths, stretch your range. Spend time in the desert. This is my son and his friends at Burning Man. And okay, it's not exercise. All the lifestyle recommendations out there are half right. They got half of it right. Exercise is good, but it's about variation in exercise, different routines, different time of day, different muscle groups, different pace. I mean, running a marathon is fine, but what happened to the first guy that ran 26.2 miles? He died, right? So think about variations of exercise rather than static exercise. In fact, now that you think about increasing homeostatic capacity, increase your dynamic range, there's now a new idea you can think about, which is that you can get above normal healthy. Because right now, everything about health is getting back to healthy. No, when you think about homeostatic capacity, you can have above baseline. You can have more health than you were born with. This is going to transform the way we think about health. Athletes are already doing it. Again, ergonomic and neutral, that's reducing dynamic range, right? We know what happens if you put your leg in a cast. You actually lose muscle. What you should do is the opposite. Instead of ergonomic and neutral, you should be stretching your dynamic range, flexion and extension. Again, our eyes have the ability to see things that are 6 inches away and 30 miles away, right? You can see it. You have incredible dynamic range. How are we using those eyes? 18 inches in front of us all day long. We're losing dynamic range. Stretch that dynamic range. Okay, so that last lady looked a little stressed. But chronic stress is what's bad. Well, I accept that. But the answer to that isn't meditation or sleeping, which is what we're told. Sleep and meditate more. That's all good stuff. But what I'm here to tell you is it's actually that and alternating with something exhilarating, right? Don't just meditate, do something exciting. It's the variation that matters. It's not meditation or sleep. It's the change. Increase your dynamic range. Again, there's so much news out there and recommendations about food. Eat this, eat that, eat that. I'm here to tell you the exact opposite. I'm here to tell you to eat a dynamic range of diet. It's okay to eat healthy, but if you keep doing that, you're going to lose metabolic capacity. So fine if you eat healthy, but have at least one bag of Dorito per month. Otherwise, you're going to lose metabolic capacity. Okay, we're supposed to have a wide range of human experiences, and we're putting everybody on Prozac. We're losing this dynamic range. Stretch it out, right? We're supposed to be happy and sad. That's totally okay. In fact, if you think about the things that really resonate, whether it's music or the arts, this is Shakespeare, and I basically drew a graphical line around the plot of Shakespeare. It basically is a dynamic range, right? These are the things that really resonate inside of us. Okay. Then this means you should change the way you think about the world by having new experiences. Go travel, go do amazing things, go listen to interesting talks, hang out with new people, try a different way to look at things. Look at the world upside down. Try on the opposing point of view. Keep stretching your mental dynamic range as well. Go to Burning Man, which will totally throw you for a loop. I started doing improv on stage, which completely changed my perspective on humor. I couldn't find any pictures on the internet on this one. And the other thing that really helps is laughter. Laughter dramatically increases our pulmonary dynamic range, and that's a gateway to health as well. So this is really an amazing thing, right? I mean, I think we're on the front end of a revolution in longevity sciences. If we're able to successfully increase homeostatic capacity, we're going to unleash human capacity. But while we're waiting for all that, the good news is that the gateway to your personal longevity, the gateway to increasing your functional longevity, isn't eating more broccoli, like we were told when we were young. It's actually doing more of the things you already love doing. More time in the sun, more time sleeping, more time meditating, more time riding roller coasters, more time skiing, spending time in the desert, meeting with interesting people, eating different kinds of food, trying on new ideas, learning more, having more sex, laughing more. These are all things we love doing. And that actually is the best news of all. Thank you so much.